what he learned was a good story.
Yes.
Well, I want to welcome everybody here tonight to the Faith and Finance Workshop. This is kind of a workshop format. Hopefully you can be a little interactive on this. We're talking about aligning your money with your values tonight. So this first sheet that you have in your folder, I would like for you to just go ahead and fill out the top part that says your name, your phone number, and your email address. And I will be collecting those later, but the second page that's in your folder will be for you to keep and remind you of what we talked about here this evening. And if you want to make other notes on it, you can do that as well. I'll just give you a few more seconds to just finish that top part, and we're ready to go. So later on this evening, there is a drawing. That's why we have tickets in a bowl. And we're giving away a few things tonight, but one of the big things that we're giving is actually 2 tickets to the Maryland Symphony Orchestra. And they're premiering the Aruka Symphony by James Lee III, who's a Seventh-day Adventist composer. He's a fairly prominent Adventist composer. And so the tickets are for Saturday night, February 12th. So that's Valentine's Day weekend. And it'll be a nice opportunity in the Maryland Theater here in Hagerstown. They're really nice seats down close to the front, but not too close to the front, if you know what I mean. And also in the splash zone a little bit. So keep those tickets until the end, and we'll do that drawing then. I do want to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Jay Perry. I was a pastor for 20 years in the Kansas-Nebraska Conference, in the Minnesota Conference, and Central California Conference. I was mostly a church planter, starting new congregations, and enjoyed that a lot. We moved to Maryland 3 years ago for my wife's job. She's the head librarian at Hagerstown Community College. And I had, over the years, I had started helping pastors figure out clergy taxes. Clergy taxes are notoriously difficult because you receive a W-2 as if you're an employee, but you also have to pay quarterly estimated taxes and your own Social Security and Medicare. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of pastors don't know what things they can deduct and can't deduct, and the parsonage allowance is very difficult. And when you pair that with the 403B, it all kind of becomes a mess. So I had started helping pastors with clergy taxes while I was a pastor. So I wasn't getting paid for it. I was just doing it out of the love of my heart, you know. And I was also running Financial Peace University for our churches to help people get out of debt and really understand their finances better. So right now I am a fiduciary financial advisor at Turning Point Financial, which is in Frederick. They've won the Best of the Best financial planning company in Frederick for the last 3 years. And I really love working there. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that tonight. One of the real reasons that I love working there is because they completely support this aligning your money with your values that we're going to talk about tonight. Kendra and I have a son in high school at Highland View Academy. He's 16 years old and he's driving, and that makes me nervous. And we also have a fluffy white dog named Jack. I'm active here. I also preach and at different churches every now and then. I preach here sometimes and teach and sing and play piano, and I just have a lot of fun, so it's great. My claim to fame, the biggest thing that I'm famous for, is that I once met James Dean. the Sausage King. James Dean was shooting a movie in Jefferson, Texas, Big Bad John, and I knew him, of course, from the sausage commercials. And I watched them film a stunt car scene where they, spin out the tires and then go up over railroad tracks and land on the other side. And I was just, wow, I was amazed. So I went and got his autograph afterwards, and he said, "Son, you like Jimmy Dean sausage?" And I was like 12 or 13. I said, "No, sir, I'm a vegetarian." And he just shook his head. He was, a lot of good that does me. So here are some disclosures, standard disclosures. I can't give you legal advice in a group setting. I can't give you individual financial advice in a group setting. So please don't misconstrue anything I'm saying for personal financial advice. But because you are here this evening, you are entitled to a free consultation. So we can sit down together at no cost, and I can, look at your finances, and we'll talk about some different areas that we can go over. So tonight we're talking about aligning your money with your values. There's a rule in aviation that for every 60 miles you fly, if you're 1 degree off, you end up a mile away off of your target. So in 1979, a passenger jet out of New Zealand was flying to Antarctica, and they didn't realize that their panel was 2 degrees off. So the pilots were very experienced. They knew the route. They had done this hundreds of times. And they went to fly low over the landscape so that people could see Antarctica. And they didn't realize they were 28 miles off course. And they ended up crashing the airplane into a mountain that they didn't know was there. It's important to stay on course. It's important to be aligned in the right direction. So here's kind of an outline of what we're doing tonight. We're going to talk about what are your values. The second thing we're going to do is talk about how your values make it into your everyday life. We're going to talk about your values and how the values can make it into your investments. And then we're going to talk about your values and your legacy so that your values live on long after you do. There's food. If you need it, there are restrooms. They're out in the hallway and they're to the left. With all that, let's have a word of prayer and go ahead and begin. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for loving us, for bringing us here this evening, for keeping us safe. As we talk about aligning our money with our values, we ask that you will teach us and that you will help bring to mind the values that you've put in our hearts, and that you will help us to see very tangible ways that we can align our values more closely with yours, and that we can align our money with those values as well. We pray these things in your heavenly name. Amen. Your values and your worldview determine your actions, right? It's interesting, over the years they've talked about values voters, right? And they were only talking about one part of the voting public when they said values voters. But the truth of the matter is, everybody was voting their values. Everybody who goes to the polls and puts in a ballot is voting their values, because we really don't do anything else. We live and work and walk and talk and think according to our values. So it guides our decisions. David said this in Psalm 119, "The law from your mouth is more precious to me than thousands of pieces of silver or gold." This is probably the most explicit values statement that we see in the Bible, okay? This is David saying explicitly that if it were to come down to it, the choice between him violating the law of God and getting rich, right? It's a slam dunk decision for him. He's going to keep the law of God no matter what, no matter how rich it could make him to violate it. Does that make sense? He's giving you a value statement. He says, I value this more than that. Your values often show up most clearly at times of physical, emotional, or financial distress. When I was pastoring in Minnesota, my mom was dying of cancer out in California. And she had been diagnosed at stage 4, and every doctor told her she only had a few months to live. Well, we went out to visit her one Christmas from Minnesota all the way out to California, and she was not being well taken care of. Nobody was doing anything for her or helping her, and we didn't realize how bad it was. So we said, move in with us. We'll come and we'll pack your house and we'll sell stuff and we'll move you all the way across the country. You can live with us, right? It was an easy decision for us. Kendra and I didn't have to talk about it more than a minute. We were like, no, we value our family and the health and well-being of my mother more than we do our privacy and our distance and our financial well-being. We made a decision based on our values that came from a distressful situation. Does that make sense? So my mom was living with us, and my wife was in an accident. She had a traumatic brain injury from a sledding accident. We're in Minnesota, and that's how you get brain injuries up there, is in sledding accidents. So she had to quit working, and all of a sudden I was her primary caregiver, and I was my mom's primary caregiver, and I was my son's primary caregiver. And during that time, we made a decision that even though we can hardly afford anything, we would keep Nathaniel in Adventist schools, because that was one of our values. We came up against a financial crisis in our own lives and a health crisis, and so it showed our values more clearly in that instance. If you are a Christian, of course, the Bible gets to determine what are your values. We align our values with the values that we see in the Bible. And as we grow in discipleship, the longer we follow Christ, the more Jesus speaks into our lives, and our values come to mirror his values closer and closer. So why a Christian worldview? This is from a book, Gospel for Life, The Value of Teaching a Biblical Worldview. That's from a magazine, excuse me. Without God's word and the gospel, man has no reliable moral compass. People make decisions based upon their individual felt needs and desires. Each individual becomes a law unto himself, choosing what's right in his own eyes without respect to God's standards. So we have the Bible. We've got the 10 Commandments. We, as Adventists, have the writings of Ellen White that can also guide our values, what's important to us. And we don't have to be, like the Apostle Paul says, flailing around in the wind. So exercise number 1 is on your second worksheet. The second worksheet has this huge word cloud to start out of different values. Now, you'll notice on there that value number 2 is alcohol. I'm not going to judge you. But what that means for you is if you were to circle that, or if you put a box around that, you know that that probably means anti-alcohol, okay? Same thing with animal testing. I don't know anybody in here who's like, yes, let's test cosmetics on animals. Okay, so as one of your core values of your whole life, right? So when you're making these selections, just know that over here where it says pornography, that doesn't mean you're valuing pornography. It says that you have a value that has to do with pornography. Does that make sense? All right, so we're just going to do 3 minutes here for you to, number one, circle up to 10 values. And if there are 2 of you, this is a great thing to do, both of you individually, so you can compare your values later and kind of create a master list. But you're gonna circle 10 values to start off with, and then after that, you're going to refine that down to 5 values that you're gonna put boxes around, okay? So right now, we're gonna take 2 minutes to circle up to 10 of these values, and go. All right, is everybody pretty close to their 10 circles? Okay. Let me give you now 1 minute and 30 seconds to put a box around your top 5. So now from this list of 10 circles that you have, you're going to choose 5 of those to say these are really important to me. These are big priorities in my life. And you'll see there are lines down at the bottom for other values, if you find that this doesn't really do the trick for you.
It's easy to choose between bad and good, but all of them are so good.
Right.
Oh.
It is a hard thing. And of course, we can be for all of these, right? I mean, we can have kind of as a baseline, but the question really comes down to how are you going to align things? So we need to know what we're aiming for in our alignment. All right? Is everybody done with their top 5? How do you feel about your top 5? You okay? Yes? You feel like David said, hey, if it were gonna come down to making tons of money or keeping these values, I would keep these values. This is it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we move on to your values and your daily life. Okay? G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Show me the stubs in a man's checkbook, and I will tell you what kind of man he is." And what he was saying was, of course, that how we actually live our lives on a day-to-day basis reveals what our values are. They show what our values are. So let's go to exercise number 2, which is on the back of that page. And question number 1 is, if you were to look at your spending, where would you say you spend most of your money? We're talking big categories here, okay? Big kind of budgeting categories. Where would you say you spend most of your money? Go ahead and write it down. Take just 20, 30 seconds to write down big categories of where does your money actually go. I'm going to assume that for some of us, a lot of that money goes to making sure we have a place to live
Mortgage.
and making sure we have food on our table. And for others of us, it's going to be the Christian education we have our kids in, right? What do you think of these values? These are good values, right? I mean, there's a verse in the Bible that says, that a man, let's see, how does it say it? I should have put it in my notes. I'll put it in my notes for next time. But a righteous man takes care of his family. And there are 2 verses that I'm conflating. One says, leaves an inheritance to his children's children, so that's one. But another one says, in the house of the righteous there are stores of oil and food. And these verses are really talking about us taking care of our families. Number 2 is, what are some causes that you've given to in the past? What are some things that made you open your heart and open your wallet and say, I want to give money to that cause or that mission or that nonprofit organization? What are some things that you've given to in the past? And this doesn't have to just be money. This can also be your time, your effort, your talents. But what are some things that you have given to in the past? Question number 3 there. What does that tell you about your values? And number 4, where would you like to give more? And again, this isn't for me, this is for you. I won't tell your pastor. Where do you want to give more? Maybe not right now, but eventually. Where do you want to give more? There can be a problem, though, with a mismatch between our values and what we actually do. So, Carl Richards is a financial advisor. He does financial planning, and he is also published very often in the New York Times. He's their money illustrator, so he writes money concepts on napkins and Sharpies, and kind of helps people understand big picture issues. But he's first and foremost a financial planner. And he's telling the story about one of his clients who says, I really want, my biggest value would be to spend more time with my kids. I want to coach their soccer. They love soccer so much, and they're in need of an assistant coach, and I would love to do that, but I don't really have enough time, so I need to save up some more money first, so I'm working overtime a lot, and I can't make that sacrifice to be their coach. A few months later, Carl gets a call from this same client who says, hey, can we take $90,000 out and buy a new Tesla and power adapter for the garage to plug the Tesla in? And Carl says to his client, you're probably gonna fire me for telling you this, but you absolutely should fire me if I don't tell you this. You have a perfectly fine Toyota Camry that'll last you another 10 years. When I'm looking at your values that you said you have, the car and the luxury isn't in there. You said you wanted to spend more time with your kids. Isn't that why you're working the extra hours? Is so eventually you can quit and then go coach their soccer? A good financial planner is going to help bring back to mind what you've said that your values are. Where your treasure is, Jesus says, there will your heart be also, right? So what's interesting is that this is a cause and effect relationship that Jesus sets up here. He says, where you put your money, that's what you're going to start caring about. You obviously won't care about the stock market if you don't have money in the stock market. You just won't. You will start caring about the ups and downs of the stock market, though, if you have money in it. Where your money is, that's where your heart is going to go. And so we have an opportunity, of course, to say, these are my values and these are my aspirational values. These are the values I want to have. How can I aim my money at that so that I start caring more about that? Does that make sense? Giving makes our priorities real, and giving actually changes our hearts. One of the things that we do in this church, of course, is give tithes and offerings. The tithes go to support the worldwide work of ministry, to make sure that we have pastors in our churches, to make sure that the conferences and the unions and the division, the general conference function, and that the word of Christ goes out to the whole world. And then we have offerings for individual things and our local ministries here at church. And we may have a special offering like we've had just recently here to renovate our bathrooms. A lot of our offering money here in this area goes to Highland View Academy and to Mount Etna Academy. And there's money going to evangelism right now. So that's tithes and offerings. And your money is showing up as part of your values, right? In your tithes and offerings. If you give to nonprofits or causes or other ministries, you can see some of your values in those as well, or it can direct your values into those areas. The American Heart Association or literacy programs or ADRA, water and infrastructure programs. If you care for veterans, for instance, you might give money to that to help the veterans in the world. So there are some tools that we can use to be sure that we're aligning our values with our money on kind of this daily level, right? This every single day, in and out. One of those tools we can use, of course, is a family cash flow plan, which sounds a whole lot better than budget. Budget sounds like budget noodles or budget food or a budget car. Nobody wants to drive a budget car, right? But a family cash flow plan. A family cash flow plan is you being really intentional, aiming your money at your values every week, every month. Aiming your money at your values and then letting it go toward your values. And so that's, a weekly or monthly sort of thing that you can do with a budget. A second way that you can aim your money at your values is through longer term financial planning. Sit down with a financial planner and say, hey, these are some of my values. How can I be sure that these make it into my budget? It doesn't make sense right now. I don't really know where to start, but could I put money into that area? What would that look like long term? Okay, so that's another tool that you can use. But there can be a mismatch in that too. Kendra's mom went to a financial advisor that she'd been going to for years. And Kendra's mom was very faithful in giving tithes and offerings. And the financial planner allowed it because she was getting a tax deduction, okay? But 2 years ago with the TCJA passing, the standard deduction went up to $25,000. And so all of a sudden she wasn't giving enough tithes and offerings to get a deduction on her taxes. And so her financial advisor brought it up, not just once or twice or 3 times, but brought it up over and over and over again. Why are you wasting your money giving it to this church? Why are you giving? And she'd say, no, that's part of my values. I've always given money to the church. I've always given my tithes and offerings. And the financial planner just couldn't understand why she would be throwing her money away like that. Well, that's not what a good financial planner should be doing. A good financial planner should help you to understand your values that you have, and then aim your money at those values, not trying to impose their values on you. Does that make sense? One thing that we can do, if you are privileged enough to be above 72 years old, you have to take from your retirement plan required minimum distributions. Why? So that they can tax you on the money, right? So if you're paying taxes and you're receiving required minimum distributions from your IRA or 401k or 403b or whatever, there are things that you can do. You can give instead a qualified charitable distribution, where instead of that money coming to you and you having to pay taxes on it, you can have them send that money directly to your church or to the nonprofit of your choice, and then you don't have the tax liability on it. So the church actually ends up with more money and you end up owing less tax. It's a win-win-win. And then the government doesn't see that 20%. So depending on how you feel about that, that might be a win too, right? So there are things like that that you can do to make sure that your money is getting where you want it to go on a daily basis. There's another thing that you can do is if you have stocks, individual stocks, you can donate those stocks directly to the church or to the nonprofit. And then you don't have to pay the capital gains tax on it. The church gets the entire amount and you get to write off that amount. And so again, the donations can be higher and your tax bill can be lower. So those are just some things that you can do on a daily basis to aim your money where it goes, kind of day in and day out. to help you put more money there and avoid taxes. So those are just some tools. You could also give a donor advised fund. This is a big thing that's really come up ever since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2018, is that if you have a lump sum of money that you know you want to give a lot of it to the church or a lot of it to, different nonprofits over time, you can put all of it into a donor advised fund at one time and get a big front end tax deduction, like 2 or 3 years worth of tax deductions. And then over time, you can send that money out to the nonprofits. And while it's in that fund, it can grow and grow and grow, but you're able to take the tax deduction on the front end, get it to where it goes, and then have that money grow. So again, it's avoiding taxes. So these are strategies that you can use to aim your money where you want it on kind of a daily basis. So if we go back to our first sheet here, aligning your money with your values. If you need some help with family cash flow planning or want to talk more about that with me, you can just put a check mark there on your sheet. If you want to talk about financial planning, whether that's family financial planning or financial planning for a business that you own or run, you could put a check mark by that box as well. Kind of the meat of what we're talking about today is your values and your investments. Every business has values, and every business has a worldview. Its actions are driven by a set of values. When you own mutual funds and stocks, you're financially tied to the actions of that company. And not just in a way like where you're consuming. When you own stocks or mutual funds, you are actually considered an owner of that company. You're part owner of the company. And so if a company, for instance, is distributing pornography, and that's not in your core values, or if you own a company that is distributing tobacco or alcohol, and you say, no, I want to be as far away from that as possible, it's one of those mismatches, right, between our values and our money. So what kind of businesses do you own? Most people don't know what kind of businesses they own inside their portfolios. They don't, unless they've built that portfolio themselves and they say, well, I own some AT&T, which I probably should have sold years ago because AT&T is doing horrible. And I own some Amazon because, it's growing fast. And I own some Tesla and I own some Apple, because they've been doing well, right? So, but most people don't know what companies they own inside their portfolios, mostly because if you own a mutual fund, then that mutual fund is going to be made up of hundreds of companies sometimes, okay? Are those companies' efforts and values in alignment with yours, or are they in direct competition with yours? What are you really invested in? People are shocked sometimes when they find what companies support that they own. There's just a little S&P 500 breakdown. There are some biblical teachings on investments. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. You shall not bring the fee of a prostitute or the wages of a dog into the house of the Lord in payment for any vow, for both of these are an abomination. His master said to him, of course, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with little things, and now I will make you master of many things. So there are these biblical teachings about what we can own as Christians or as God followers, what we can support and what we can fund. Companies that operate with a biblical worldview will, of course, value their employees and their clients. They're determined to treat all people with equality. They will maintain care for the environment, creation care. They will recognize that people matter even more than profit. They are not going to be engaged in anti-Christian activism. They will not have policies that compromise the rights of Christian employees. They will not fund organizations or promote legislation that destroys or harms life, right? So these are these kind of big picture biblical values that we could say companies that are violating this are in direct violation of biblical values. We reinforce a culture through what we're invested in. As we buy and sell securities, we're inevitably reinforcing or discouraging behaviors of businesses. So what types of business behaviors do we want to reinforce? And what types of behaviors do we want to discourage? And I think you already know the answers to that, right? Because you circled them and put squares around them on your paper. You know deep down inside, I do not want companies that do this, and I do want companies that act like this. Isn't that right? Many secular businesses and faith-based businesses incorporate values that respect people, the environment, and their community. Some companies do this intentionally because they have Christian values, and some companies just do it coincidentally because that's how it happened to be. These practices, though, can significantly contribute to the good for stakeholders, neighbors, and the world. So premise number one that we're talking about here is that everything is God's, including our wealth, right? Everything that we have, we are supposed to glorify Him with. And number two, when we invest in stocks, we own those companies. And so it is an extension of our values, the companies that we own. So we're going to start talking about BRI, okay? BRI is an acronym for Biblically Responsible Investing, okay? It's known by many names. MRI, Morally Responsible Investing. Some places call it faith-based investing. But we're just going to call it BRI here. BRI was, I know, right?
Oh, I'm laughing because the other one, MRI, FBI.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Exactly.
BRI is your safest one.
Yes. So biblically responsible investing really kind of started out as a subset of ESG investing. Okay, ESG investing is environmental, social, and governance. So if you ever do an internet search about investing your values, you're going to see a lot of these acronyms. ESG is the first one you're going to see. It's going to be the biggest one that you see, where we say, okay, we don't want companies that are actively destroying the environment. We want companies that are socially responsible, so they're not using slave labor, they understand human rights, they're not using child labor, right? And then governance issues. In other words, is there equality in their boards of directors? Are they actively trying to make sure that they're rooting out sexism and racism in the workplace, right? So that's ESG. Where BRI really started was this negative screening, where an investor would say, I want all of this in my portfolio, but I don't want alcohol and tobacco, right? The American Heart Association very early on They're one of the big kind of core investors back in the day who said, we're going to start screening our funds and make sure that none of the stock that we own in our investments is for tobacco and alcohol, because they consider that really important to their mission as a company. BRI kind of started out as a financial boycott, where they said, we don't want to support these behaviors. Early on, BRI had a below average track record. In other words, it didn't do nearly as well as the S&P 500. It didn't do nearly as well as other stock portfolios. There was no indexing options, so you couldn't just buy a biblically screened like mutual fund. You had to go and put your own together, stock by stock by stock by stock. I want this one, I don't want this one. I want this one, I don't want this one. And because of that, there were high fees. Because every time you buy individual stocks like that, there's a commission fee that then goes for the buying and selling of those stocks. So it was very high fee to have a BRI portfolio very early on. And just because it was not bad doesn't mean that it was good. You know the difference, right? All right, well, BRI has come a long way since then. And instead of just negative screening, they now have kind of norms-based. We want to be sure that there are best-in-class practices in these companies. Not just, oh, they'll do, but saying, these companies are best in class for the environment and for social good and for governance and also for helping healing, okay? They have ESG integration in them. You can do thematic investing or even impact investing. And impact investing is then saying, okay, you know what I want to do? I care so much about literacy in the inner city that I want to build this impact portfolio for book publishers and companies that have literacy in the inner city as part of their values, that they're funding that. Okay, so BRI has come a long way. Like I said before, these funds used to only be available to large institutions like the American Heart Association, or large endowments like Yale and Harvard, had very large endowments, millions and billions of dollars actually, so they could hire an individual money manager who could buy specific stocks in their portfolio. Or it used to be that it had to be a very large group plan. When the Adventist Church started their group retirement plan back in the year 2000, it was really exciting because there were screened funds that Adventist pastors and teachers and other employees could buy into, where they said, we have looked at these funds and we know that these funds don't fund war, these funds don't fund weapons, they don't fund alcohol, tobacco. We're not really sure about caffeine though, right? But these funds were aligned then with the Seventh-day Adventist Church stated values. And so it was pretty exciting that we were able very early on to be part of a group plan like that had its own biblically screened funds. And of course, very high net worth investors have always been able to do this. It used to be the only way that you as an individual could buy in is if you had $500,000 or $1 million to put in a fund so that you could screen it. Now, biblically responsible investing is available to everyone who has $500 to invest. I mean, if you're going to put money in your IRA or your Roth IRA or 401k or 403b rollovers, even if it's just $8,000 or whatever you've got in there, you don't have to be ultra high net worth. You don't have to be an institution. You don't have to be in a large group plan anymore. You individually can have a BRI fund. So do your investments benefit rather than exploit customers? Treat employees fairly and equitably, positively influence the young in society, share resources with the poor and the vulnerable. You can do a more positive screen. And I wanna offer that to you as well. If you do wanna go ahead and schedule an appointment with me and bring your portfolio, and even if it's mutual fund portfolios, I can plug in those fund names and it can show you what values you are supporting in those companies. So like I said before, often these type of funds underperformed regular investments, and that's not the case now. That blue line that you see up on the screen is a biblically responsible investment fund since the year 2000. And you'll see in a lot of cases, it was outpacing the S&P 500. It was actually doing better than its benchmark, which is shocking, right? But there are actually good reasons for this. When companies are responsible in that sort of way, they're open to way fewer lawsuits, way fewer settlements. The people who work there have a sense of mission, so there's less turnover. It makes sense for companies to do good, and by doing good, they also do well. Here are some quotes. The results of the study found that the biblical investing methodology of security selection resulted in an annualized outperformance compared with non-screened benchmarks. In other words, this quote just says, these sort of funds do better than the average market. The University of Oxford quotes here, 88% of the studies showed that ESG practices resulted in better performance of the companies. 80% of the studies show that the stock price performance is positively influenced by good sustainability practices. So this is really the next wave of what's happening. People are deciding to point their money where their values are. And companies are sitting up and taking notice. Here's an additional way that, again, I'm gonna brag on Turning Point Financial for a minute. Okay, Turning Point Financial, the company that I work for, was started by two Christians. And then they started calling it Turning Point Financial back in the 90s. So they're 27 years old now. And they have been really interested in this over the years. And so 3 or 4 years ago, they found a company that could do this. And so now if you decide to invest with Turning Point Financial, you can choose from their regular aggressive or aggressive moderate or moderate funds or conservative funds or whatever, or you can select their biblically screened funds that they have selected in their investment committee. And they have this as one of their values. And so when I started working there, I had already talked to Kendra for a couple of years. You know what I'd really love to do? I'd really love to get into that ESG investing and values-based investing. But who would do that? I had a friend in California, in San Luis Obispo, Art Tabuenca. His entire financial advising business is him doing values-based investing. I thought, man, if I'm gonna do this, I would love to do that kind of investing. And now I'm able to. And it's just amazing to me. Well, so our partner company, Inspire Investment Portfolio Managers, every portfolio manager takes a fee when they invest your funds. Every portfolio manager does. This portfolio manager donates 50% of their fees to outreach projects and development projects, infrastructure, charitable and religious projects. For instance, the potential impact of a $250,000 portfolio can provide 333 people with a clean water source, or can distribute 1,000 Bibles, or can distribute 200 Operation Shoebox to kids. And so they're actively involved in doing good in the world with the money that's invested through them. So not only do they construct portfolios that align with values, they also give back to the community in significant ways. Now, if you don't like the way they screen your portfolios, that's fine. You can select your own values off of this list and say, you know what? I just don't want companies that do this and this and this and this. And we can construct that for you if you have as little as $25,000 to invest. So again, it's not that super high benchmark, but like anybody can start investing biblically through, you know, a fund like this that's pre-existent, where you're not choosing your own values specifically. I want to show just a little video here. Let's see if it plays automatically. There it goes.
Historically, investments have been seen only as a way to maximize financial returns. If you wanted to make a difference in the community, you would do that through your gifting. So you would essentially divide your financial intentions into two buckets, one for investing and one for giving. But increasingly, people are starting to question this approach and ask, what impact are my investments having? Nearly 6 in 10 people say the social and environmental impact on the companies they invest in is important to their decision making. The good news is, increasingly more investment options are being offered that provide a way to integrate values into investment decision making. What this means is that instead of having to choose between a financial return and a social return, you can now invest money with a double bottom line approach that seeks to maximize financial returns and social returns. This approach has many different names. They cover a wide spectrum, ranging from a philosophy of doing no harm by using negative screens to doing good by applying positive screens. But the underlying idea is the same. All businesses have a social return. The only question is whether their impact on the community is a positive or negative one. Over the long term, the most successful companies are the ones that take care of their employees, their communities, and serve the best interests of their customers. So let's integrate values with investments. It's the right thing to do, and it will lead to better long-term financial results. By investing with purpose, we can do well and do good.
So if you do want to take a look at your own portfolio, you know, you can do that. Again, there's no obligation, but, you know, I can run those for you and just see, so you can know what you're invested in and take a look at that. And if you do want to do that, go ahead and check the box on your sheet that says conscious investing or biblically responsible investing. Number 4 here is about your values and your legacy, right? So we talked first about our values in our everyday life. Then we talked about our values in investing, which is growing our money. And now we're talking about what kind of impact do your values leave after you have passed away? Your values can still have a financial impact into the future, decades, generations, depending on how you set your money up. People want their values to outlive them through family traditions or through church involvement. I can't tell you how many people come up to us pained that their children are not in church, right? Why? Why do they care? They want their values, the Christian values that they've learned. They want those to live on in the next generation and the generation after that, People want their values to outlive them, so they establish scholarship funds. You know, scholarship funds that can go on and on and on. The DeHaans, who used to live here in the area, my son gets a DeHaan scholarship to go to school. Their money, their values for Christian education are outliving them. Through endowments for education or arts or ministry, through building projects, like the girls' dorm is DeHaan Hall over at HVA. This room is Payden Hall, and it's named after your family, right? There we go. Building projects. You know, churches were built because people stepped up and said, I want something that has my values that outlives me. If you're sitting in the shade of a tree, it's because someone back in the day planted it, you know, and you are reaping the rewards of their foresight. You can also establish a family foundation where future generations of your family then can live out those values. After you've passed, they can still take a look at the charter of that family foundation and say, this family foundation gives to these type of projects. And they can continue to be involved in your value year after year, generation after generation. And so here are some legacy tools that are kind of interesting to me. A will, right? If you don't have a will, then Annapolis gets to decide where your kids go. If you don't have a will, Annapolis gets to decide where your money goes. They have laws all set up that say if you die intestate, if you die without a will, then we're just going to do the best we can. Your family has no say in the matter. It has nothing to do with your values. It has everything to do with the values that Annapolis put on the books. Okay? You can have the Chesapeake Conference do a will for you. If you do that, of course, you have to be sure that you're giving at least 10% and preferably more to the conference in your will. So you can do that. If Kendra and I did that, we went that route. Or you could hire attorneys like, you know, we've got Horman and Nichols there in Frederick, and they're Adventist young men who are lawyers, and they did a great job on my will. And, you know, I refer people to them all the time. But Horman and Nichols, you know, if you just want to go ahead and pay for some attorneys to do your will. How many of you need a will or know you should have a will, but you're waiting to get around to it? Here's around to it.
Oh, around to it. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
If you need to, yes, you're welcome. If you need to update your will and be sure that it's current, get around to it. Don't wait. Get that done. Another legacy tool is life insurance, right? You can own a life insurance policy and say, I want the beneficiary of that life insurance policy to be this church or this conference or this ministry or this nonprofit. You can go ahead and put that into your life insurance policy. You could set up a charitable remainder trust. A charitable remainder trust is where, let's say you have $1 million and you say, I'm going to give this to the conference in a charitable remainder trust. You give the money to the conference, and then they give you an income for as long as you live. You get an income off of this money. It's invested inside this trust. You're getting enough money to live on, and then when you pass away, then the conference takes the remainder of it. So that's a charitable remainder trust. There are huge tax benefits for that, of course. You could set up a multi-generational family foundation. You know, Horman Nichols can help you with that too. There are some very powerful tools when they're used together. If you have a charitable remainder trust, you've donated all of this money, and then money is going to be coming to you as an income every month or every year, whatever, you could buy a life insurance policy with that money that's coming, and that life insurance policy could go to your kids. And so the conference is getting their big chunk of money in the charitable remainder trust, and then your kids are getting a huge chunk of money through the life insurance that was funded that way. So there are very powerful financial planning opportunities when some of these things are used together. Charitable lead trust with a donor advised fund is another one that's just huge that people put together to make sure that their values outlive them. You say, well, Jay, I don't have $1 million. I don't know who you think I am. I want you to see this quote. This is from Kiplinger's September 17, so just a couple months ago. 63% of the private foundations in the United States have endowments of less than $1 million. 63%. I would call that a vast majority. Great work is being fueled by people out of the spotlight who are quietly and persistently pursuing their philanthropic mission and affecting change. They're making a huge difference with small family foundations, small trusts compared to, you know, the Rockefellers or these ginormous trusts everywhere. 63% of private foundations have less than $1 million. A single draft horse can pull up to 8,000 pounds, like a Clydesdale. And so you'd think that when you put two of these draft horses together, they could pull, math, 16,000 pounds, right? But the truth is, these two draft horses, when they're yoked together and pulling in the same direction, they can pull 3 times the amount. They can pull 24,000 pounds.
Oh, wow.
But if you train them for a month together, they can pull 36,000 pounds. Just these two draft horses. Because they're pulling in the same direction. There's this power of alignment that we're talking about when we align our values and our money together. So I just want to show you kind of this impact chart that I have in my head, okay? This red down at the bottom, that's your values. That's your foundation. These are my biblical values, and these are the things that I care about. And that just goes on and on, very steady. This next line, the orange there, is that daily impact of you giving tithes and offerings, giving to a nonprofit, giving however you can to whatever it is that supports your values, right? This next line is your investments. Your investments reinforcing those values, and they're growing over time. And then after you pass away, and you're no longer giving daily, and your investments are no longer yours, your values can still impact the world in a powerful way when you have aligned your money with your values. So this last thing here, this faith and finance, you know, you could check any of these boxes if you want an insurance review or an overall investment health review or retirement readiness review. I'd be glad to sit down with you and start talking over those issues with you. When we get together, you won't have to bring your checkbook. Like I said, it's completely complimentary. We've covered a lot of ground today, and there's one thing that I learned in psychology classes about this kind of a workshop, and it's that after a while you forget what you just heard here tonight, okay? After 1 week, about 1/3 of the information is just gone. 2 weeks later, an elephant never forgets, but your 2 elephants are gone now. And in 3 weeks, you're gonna be like, Jay? Who's Jay? And so I would encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to sit down with me and go over some of this information as it applies specifically to you. Here we go. Turning Point Financial helps individuals and businesses with financial planning. We do investment management, we do taxes and accounting, and we also do insurance. And we're really a one-stop, full-service investment advisory firm. And I'm excited that they're giving me the opportunity to talk about something that I care about so much, like this, stewardship and aligning our values with our finances. So I want to open it up to questions, but again, I can't give individual advice in a group setting. But if I said something that I need to clarify or something that you'd like, just a little better understanding on, now would be